If you don't understand psychological trauma and how that changes the brain and creates a stuck neural network that keeps triggering you and triggering you and triggering you and not letting you move forward. This video is about self-EMDR and how it works in the brain to promote lasting changes that can help you. I'm Viv, medical scientist and therapist. EMDR, as many of you might already know, is a gold standard therapy for PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And it's a great tool that really works to heal psychological trauma, to really move things forward and change things. I go into detail about how this works in the brain in my video, How EMDR Works. However, here I'm going to talk about self-EMDR. Self-EMDR is a tool that you can use either between your EMDR sessions or stand alone for times that you really need it. Self-EMDR works in the brain just like EMDR. It uses the same principle. So when you do what we call bilateral stimulation of the brain, so either using tapping or eye movements, what happens in the brain is a de-arousal response. So the brain is able to calm down to let you reprocess a traumatic memory and integrate it in a way that is really helpful and healing. So this might not really land if you don't understand psychological trauma and how that changes the brain and creates a stuck neural network that keeps triggering you and triggering you and triggering you and not letting you move forward. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about how psychological trauma impacts the brain and creates a stuck neural network. This happens physiologically, biologically, because when you're in an event, something really scary or terrible happens to you, or you witness something horrible, the brain puts you into a fight or flight or faint response to protect you. This is automatic, unconscious. And what happens as a result is your higher level thinking areas like the prefrontal cortex are sort of shut down, and the activity really just goes to the body to mobilize you. So this obviously happens for very good evolutionary reasons, but the side effect is it can create a psychological trauma response like PTSD, where you have a stuck neural network and things are just kind of looping and looping. And the reason that happens is because the mind doesn't necessarily, not only can it not process what happened at the time, but even when you remember it, the memory can be affected, and also your ability to process it when you remember is affected, because the memory is not necessarily formed in a regular fashion, because you're so triggered that your body has released all these neurochemicals that are blocking the higher level thinking parts of the brain and mobilizing the body. So you're not necessarily, the hippocampus is not necessarily recording the event and forming these episodic memories. Episodic means, you can say what happened when in the sequence, like, oh, last Saturday I went to lunch with my friends and we went to this restaurant, no. But rather, it's more like you can have, flashes, but you have what's called an implicit body memory, where your body really remembers what happened. And so when you get triggered, you can feel your heart pounding or the emotional responses, the physiological responses, but you might not even remember the event, or you might not remember it clearly. If you go back in your memory and you try to remember this with a therapist, let's say, and you're talking about it, whatever you can remember, or the flashes, those emotions come up again. And what happens is the brain actually gets triggered again, and again the prefrontal cortex shuts down and you can't process it and make sense of it. So this is why some forms of conventional therapy can take a really long time, because you keep getting triggered even while talking about it, and you can't process the event in a way that relieves the triggers, changes the brain networks, and lets you really heal. When you do the bilateral stimulation of the brain, what happens is that it causes a de-arousal response. So the brain sort of calms down. It has a dual attention on the stimulus and the memory. that means that the prefrontal cortex can turn on and start to think about things, start to analyze things as if you're looking at the event with a different, like from an outside perspective almost. So it's not as emotionally triggering and arousing. This allows your brain to do what it really wants to do, what it does naturally, what it would do if you weren't so traumatized. You would just do it in your sleep, because that's literally what happens when you sleep. But it hasn't been able to do it in certain cases, which is why people suffer from psychological trauma symptoms. The EMDR, the bilateral stimulation, allows this to actually, your prefrontal cortex to turn on and to watch the event, to process it, to make sense, and also for you to release those emotions and heal, right? So this is why it's so effective. And once you've done that, you've seen that, your brain has learned that, that's the permanent change. You don't have to go back. That doesn't mean that the similar events can't trigger you again, because sometimes, there's more little bits that need to be worked out. But eventually, when you've worked out all those little bits, you feel a lot better, and the same things don't keep bothering you, and you can deal with situations better. The self-EMDR technique works just like the EMDR technique, except you apply it a little bit differently. I explain the steps on how to apply self-EMDR in my course available at selfemdr.org or vivphd.com. But in short, applying this technique can really help you work through the psychological trauma and move forward and change permanently the way you feel about things and get rid of the symptoms. I'd love to hear your comments and your thoughts. Please leave them below in the comment section and let us know your thoughts. And if you felt that this explanation was helpful or beneficial, please share it, like it, share it, on your social media. That's always helpful to spread the word.